Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Napchat. It's a Napchat after dark. Our babies are in bed for the night, and that is a good feeling. I think those of you who are parents know. I'm Caleb, and this is Johanna, and the purpose of Napchats is to take some of the things that I'm talking about in my sermon, some of the things that are going on in the world, and try to apply those things a little bit more thoroughly to Christian living. And try to go some places that sermons can't really go in just specific application. So our goal is to share what we're thinking and hopefully open up the conversation for you to share also what you're thinking. That's the purpose of the comments section. If you do want to put something in there, whether it's a question or a clarification or something that you think about what we're saying, we'd be glad to hear it. So I will turn it over to you, Johanna, to tell us what we're going to talk about tonight.
So we're going to talk about some pro-choice logic in the abortion debate, I guess, and I really want to address it with both compassion and scriptural truth. And I think just right off the bat, I mean, people get very heated on both sides. Like pro-life people can just say, this is the truth and you're evil if you don't think this way. And pro-choice people, this is the truth and here, you don't care about these moms if you don't think this way. And it's just very heated. And a lot of things you might look up online, there's not much effort to understand the other side. And so I do want to have compassion. I am pro-life. However, I also understand, and I think something a lot of pro-life people might miss, I don't know if this is actually true, but just this understanding that there's a lot of suffering that often goes on with these women. They maybe come from a different background than a lot of us are used to. Motherhood seems terrifying and scary, and they're confused and maybe not confused. Maybe they feel very confident in this decision. There's just too much pain the other way. And so there's so much that's going on, and motherhood is not easy. Like whether you're choosing it or not, and if especially if you're going at it single, or it might mean a completely different lifestyle change, like it is not easy. And so I think something that pro-life and pro-choice people can come together on and just say, we're both for this, is supporting women who are moms who are in difficult situations, like in poor communities in those societies. So giving to pregnancy shelters and crisis centers and things like that is a way that something that we can all support and come together on. So just right off the bat, everyone, like if you want to help the situation, something in your neighborhood that you can do, both sides, is just help the women who do choose to become mothers. So that's how to start. Anything on that before we get into our questions?
Yeah, it is an intensely complex conversation. Mm-hmm. I mean, even when you say something like, oh, well, the people on both sides of this issue should be able to come together and help pregnancy crisis centers. There would be those on the left who would say that's not something I want to do because that furthers this idea that not getting an abortion is the preferable thing. And that's a minority opinion, of course, right, but it's still an opinion that people have. So it just speaks to the complexity of the whole thing. And you're right, it is hard to see another person's intention behind their actions, because frankly, their actions can be evil, right? And whether or not that's objectively true, I'm not saying that at this point, but if you're on your left, you look at the people on the right, or you're on the right, you look at people on the left, and you think your actions are objectively evil. Even if that is the case, I think what we can admit, even from a non-Christian worldview, is people aren't, for the most part, trying to be evil. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? I don't even think we have to be Christians to say that. Like, people are not trying to be evil. They are either misinformed, or they are deceived, or they are not thinking through something, or they are ignorant.
Or maybe just prioritizing something incorrectly. Like, this is good, but this is better.
They're not trying to be evil. Mm-hmm. And to the extent to which we can give each other that courtesy from either side and say, I realize you're not trying to be evil. Yeah. We're going to be a little bit more capable of having productive conversations. Mm-hmm. I think the issue of abortion also, you said this, but it bears repeating, is not something that people come to without having gone through a whole bunch of other stuff first, right? So they already have a sexual ethic that has brought them to the point of having a child in a less than ideal situation, whatever that might be. Or if it's not necessarily their fault in a case of rape or something like this, like they're in a bad situation, which may or may not be their fault. They also don't have necessary support. Something about their already existing life they feel is going to be completely hindered by having a child, which means there's not enough stability in their normal life in some way. And we could debate the merits of that, but that's the perception.
Right.
So like, man, like abortion is the question, but there are 12 different things behind the question that are worth discussing. What is the role of sexual ethics? What is the role of the family? What is the role of social services? What is the role of church support, community building, loneliness, technology, all these things that feed into something that expresses itself. It's like the flower that grows, and the moment it shows itself, that's what we notice.
Yeah.
But there's like all these processes that are happening before
the
they
tip
get
of
to
the
that
iceberg,
point.
really. Like,
Yeah, so it's so easy to talk about this one thing, but anybody who's been in any sort of conflict, whether it's marital conflict or friendship conflict, like what you're conflicting about usually isn't actually the issue, right? There's something deeper, there's something more foundational, fundamental that's going on there that you have to talk about.
Yeah, and just living in a sinful world, like I think is, especially for non-Christians, just so frustrating because they think, well, if we just do this, we can fix it, and we can kind of create some sort of heaven on earth if we, I don't know, just love each other and accept each other and create comfortable spaces for each other by following whatever, and that's what everyone wants. And as Christians, we just have a greater hope. And I think that really makes it like there is going to be suffering for mothers and everything. And that to me really helps with the pro-life argument and just saying, I know it's hard, but some of these questions we're going to get to really say things are going to be hard and yucky, but that is not a reason to compromise truth and compromise what God says is right. And so can we get to the questions?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So the first one I want to talk about is, I'm getting this all from posts that I see in like Facebook or something. Like these are slogans that are used. So the first one is like, this is a human rights issue, that bodily autonomy, like there is bodily autonomy for these women, and it's really their choice to say what they do with their body. They don't have to carry a being. Like that's not fair to them. And so how would you respond to that?
I would say bodily autonomy has its limits. So I don't have bodily autonomy to harm another person, right? So I don't have so much control over my body that I can use it to murder another human being outside the womb, regardless of what we think about what's going on inside the womb.
Sure.
Or even something, that is a particularly more on the left talking point, which is climate change and climate crisis and all these things. Like, do I have the bodily autonomy to drive a car that emits all sorts of CO2 into the atmosphere? Do I have the bodily autonomy to not recycle or whatever the thing might be? Saying it's a bodily autonomy thing is far too blanket of a statement. You have to nuance that and say, to what extent, for what purpose do I have bodily autonomy? We want bodily autonomy. We want freedom. We want individual rights, but those things necessarily must be limited because you live in the world with other human beings who also have autonomy and rights and these sorts of things. And so what inevitably is going to be the point of a lot of these questions is, to what extent is the child in the womb biologically human, right? Not just a clump of cells, not just a fetus, but a human.
Yeah.
To what extent do we have the obligation to defend that human? Because some humans we don't defend, right? Like some places we give capital punishment or we destroy people in war.
Right.
Sometimes we say a human life needs to be destroyed. So it's a separate question. And then finally, to what extent does government or some other entity have responsibility to protect that life?
That's a lot.
So there's three questions,
Yeah.
right? So is it a life?
Yeah.
Does that life deserve to be protected? who has a responsibility for protecting that life if it needs to be protected?
Right. Okay. I think that's a good ordering of questions, because I was going to press on you, like, well, while a woman, like, even if you do recognize that as a human life, why does the woman have the responsibility to suffer in order to save that life? Like,
Right.
is it her responsibility to do anything about it? Like, I mean, there's lots of people who are dying, like, and the child might not feel pain, so why should she have to suffer to save this life that doesn't feel pain? Why is that on her to do? And so I kind of wanted to get to that. But I think let's start with, is this a baby? Is this life? And when is it life? And, I have my own opinions and everything, but how would you go about talking about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be different whether you're talking about the concept in general versus talking to an individual. Of course, if you're speaking to an individual, you want them to start the conversation, because it is far easier to ask questions and see another person's worldview than to expose your own.
Rather than me asking you the question you would be asking.
Right. So I would say, well, where do you think life begins? And they would say whatever they would say, and then I would say, why? And then they would say whatever they would say, and I would say, okay, well, why that then?
Sure. And
we could have a conversation and go from there. If you're not talking to an individual, though, if you're just exposing the concept, there really are only two ways that you can come at this, and that is from an evidential point of view, or what might be called a scientific point of view.
Yeah.
Or you can come to it from an ideological point of view. So Christians are going to come at this from an ideological point of view. We're going to say life is life at conception because that's what the Bible says, regardless of what, like, human beings could not have any heart or any hands or toes or fingers or eyes or anything in the womb until, like, literally 35 seconds before they were born, and we would still consider it life because God says it's life. That's an ideological way of looking at it. There is a scientific point of view, and again, I'm not a scientist, so I don't presume to say this is the final word on all the science, but my sense of the science is that that it's pretty settled that life begins at conception, because there is separate genetic material, there is self-sufficiency in that child, not in the sense that they can survive without the mother, but that the process of growing is not the mother causing the child to grow, but the child is growing and using the mother in order to grow. So the child is, in a sense, a self-growing entity. That requires some nuance.
Right.
And then also just the inability for really anybody, and we see this with all the different laws that are in place in different states, particularly in the United States, about when is abortion illegal? Is it illegal at heartbeat? Is it illegal at viability? Is it illegal at whatever point is it going to be? Well, it's really hard to nail down what makes a human being.
Yeah.
So it's just a messy question to answer scientifically. And so what most scientists do, and this is proven, most scientists will say life begins at conception from a purely biological point of view.
Right. Well, and I've read things that are similar, where, like, every study in the study of embryology, like, they all say life begins at conception. Which
is why I think if you're coming at this from a pro-life point of view, we often fight the wrong battle. We want to talk a whole lot about whether the child in the womb is a human being, and there's some value in that, of course. But I think the second two questions of, is that human being worth defending, and whose responsibility is it to defend that human being if we say that the child is worth defending, those questions are more interesting, because, I mean, unless you're just a science denier, the first point is clear. It is life. It is a form of human life.
Yeah. Some of the arguments I've, like, heard against it are like, well, it's just a parasite inside of you. It's like sucking your life force, and, like, to that, like, there's no medical literature supporting that it's a parasite inside of you, and, like, oh, it's just, like, it's part of the woman. Like, the child is part of the woman. In which case, like, does a woman have 20 fingers, 20 toes? Like, yeah, there's just no evidence to support any of this. Like, it is a separate life and a separate child, a separate entity. So yeah, let's we can get to the other questions that you said. So what was the second part?
So after is it a life, is it human life, then is that human life worth defending? Because there are human lives that we say are not worth defending, right? And that is, we get that. If a person in some states or countries, if you murder, you are killed. And again, we can have an argument about capital punishment from a Christian point of view, but, like, it just stands to reason that in our culture we say some lives are not worth protecting, right? Or in the case of war, which is probably the easiest, when somebody comes and starts attacking my nation, I can kill their people because they're attacking my nation. Their lives are not worth preserving.
Yep.
Right. So we have to ask that question: Is the life worth preserving?
Okay. And so I would say, like, the most common things I have listened to would say, if the child isn't viable yet, like they couldn't even survive on their own. So, like, are they really a human if they couldn't survive on their own at 22 weeks or something with the help of medicine and everything, or when a child starts to suffer, that's when they become human. And I forget how early that is, but for the beginning of conception, they don't feel any pain. So are they an equal, like, we feel pain immensely. So where is the life then starting and or worth something? And I don't know what you would say to that.
Yeah, and there are definitely different ways to go at it. I mean, if your standard is any one of those things, like viability or pain or heartbeat, like, that doesn't stand up to reason for human beings outside the womb.
Yeah.
So there are medical conditions where you can't feel pain, right? Even as an adult.
Yeah.
So
is that a person
or not? Every one of us is dependent all the time. Even once we're outside our mother's womb, we are dependent on water and air and food and a certain temperature and a certain atmosphere.
Yeah.
All these things that make us dependent. So, is our life worth less or worth ending because we are dependent necessarily? Well, we're dependent our entire life.
Yeah. Well, and to that, I also, like, that's the same type of logic that, like, supports infanticide, which infanticide is like killing babies. And, like, most of us would agree that that's egregious. Like, no one kills babies, but there are people who would say in different cultures, or even some in our culture, who say, like, they are not worth the trouble. Like, and what is a baby? They don't, I mean, even today, most parents will say, like, well, the baby doesn't remember it, so it doesn't really matter what we do. They won't remember. And, like, that logic is faulty logic, because it's still a valuable human entity, even if they do forget it or don't feel it or don't understand it. So
that's the same logic as date rape, right?
That's so sad.
A girl is drunk and I rape her. She's not going to remember it. Is it okay for me to do that?
Right.
Well, universally we would say no.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, that argument doesn't stand up to logic either.
Yeah. Okay. What was your third? Oh, sorry. Did you have more to say on that?
No, not particularly. I mean, maybe I'll come up with something.
Okay.
Later.
All right. So what was your third point again then?
So then, who is responsible for protecting the life? Right? Is that the government's responsibility? And this is where I think the left and the right start to really practically rub up against each other. So ideologically, to this point, they are separate, right? Is it a human life? Well, ideologically, you can decide it's not a human life. And then, is the life worth preserving? Well, there may be any number of non-logical, ideological reasons that you would do that. But practically, and I think this is honestly what most people care about, is, okay, on the ground, who is responsible for whatever the decision is, right?
Yeah.
Who is responsible for deciding whether that life is worth carrying to term, taking care of that life after it's born? And people on the left would say, well, yeah, you people on the right would want life to be carried through to term, but there are higher levels of poverty, and there are less social services, less tax money allocated to people who are helping single mothers or mothers in difficult situations. And so the left would say about the right, you guys don't actually want to take responsibility for the life. You ideologically want the life to exist, but you don't actually care about the life. You're not pro-life.
Yeah.
You're anti-abortion. And people on the right would say, well, you don't actually want to be responsible for it either, so you just end the life. And that's where I think the practical part of this shows up. So go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry, just jumping on that is, like, one of the things that I saw on, like, a lot of the social media posts is that women who are, like, Black or Hispanic or something, there is significantly more deaths in their labor and delivery and everything than white people. So, like, there is so much more issues there. Like, why would they have to go through that? Why is that up to them? Like, why are we leaving these women who are risking their lives doing this say, well, you got to carry it to term? Like, sorry, if it feels heartless to say, sorry, you got to do this, whether you want to or not, like you have to do this. And I think that really is an emotional discussion right there. I feel like that's like you said, it's kind of the heart of the matter. And
it is definitely the criticism, again, of the right, of the people who would say they're pro-life is, well, it's fine for you to say you don't think that we should end life in the womb, but let's be honest about the realities of what happens when you don't end life in the womb, which is things like higher mortality rate, particularly of women of color, and there are a number of reasons of that. But we have to be honest about those reasons and say there's an issue there, right? And it's not an abortion issue. It's a poverty issue. It's an education issue. It is a systemic racism, however you define that term, issue. It's a housing issue. It's a hospitalization issue. There's so many things that go into that. That have nothing to do with abortion, right? Like, there's so many complexities to this that people just want to reduce it down to, well, I don't want the life to end in the womb, or I do want the life to end in the womb. And that is just far too simplistic of a point of view for this issue.
Yeah. I just think it's so sad. And I think those who care about life and consider them pro-life, and myself included, like, our hearts really need to, like, if we have a heart for life, then our hearts also go for these women who are considering these abortions and saying, I'm so sorry for the pain that you have and that this is difficult. And if we know these women, can we reach out to them? If we don't know them, can we support the places that do reach out to them and say, like, I will walk alongside you, hold your hand in any way, like, give up my money. But it's so hard because oftentimes even our neighborhoods are separated. So, like, I can say I'm pro-life and no one in my neighborhood is dealing with this that I know of, at least. And so my social circle's over here, yours is over there, and I just don't know or deal with your issues. And that's kind of why at the beginning I was saying it really is so good to be supporting these organizations, because they do interact with that, you know. But also maybe changing our social circles. I mean, that's a different conversation, but... that brings up a whole different topic, which is the presence of Christians in communities that have high needs, right? Yeah.
American Christianity has notoriously moved to the middle to upper middle class suburbs in America. We're not in the cities. And where are most of these problems? Well, they're in the major city centers, right? For the most part. Because Christians have slowly learned by attrition that Christianity is not about love your neighbor as yourself, but it is about find a place where I can get a whole set of neighbors that are easy to love. Right? And that's a different
and who don't have that high of needs. Like, I mean, maybe they have a baby and I deliver them a meal, or, you know, they're having a rough day and I just say they're there. And, like, you know, like, and the thing is, there are actually real issues in these communities as well, the upper middle class. But if we're talking life here, that is an issue.
And we have to be clear, like, okay, so I was born in the suburbs, right? And I was raised in the suburbs, and many people are, and that isn't something to say, like, okay, you're a terrible person because you were born and raised in the suburbs and you lived a suburban life. That's not the point. But it is to say, let's be historically honest about the progression of Christian churches out of the cities. And now let's say we lost ground. Let's go back into the cities. Let's go find the places where people are in need. Let's do our best to reach these people, serve them as well as we can. And that's a slow crawl, just like it was a slow crawl to get out of the cities. Right? I mean, it took, depending on how you count, 50, 60 years for us to be in the place that we are right now. I mean, most people would say that kind of the downturn of Christianity started in the 1960s. And I mean, it might take 50 or 60 years for us to get back into the cities and to be there for those people. Yeah. But it's a fight worth starting to go after.
Okay. I want to talk, maybe I'll talk to you more about that after the video, because I really I actually want to, or maybe we'll do another video on that, but I really want to keep going with the questions, if that's okay. And so following all of this, and I think it kind of inserts into the heart of it, where it's like these women who are struggling and in pain and stuff, there is so much like, well, men don't have a say, or if you don't want an abortion, don't have one, or like, things like that, where it's just, if you're not feeling this, if you're not in these situations, like, who are you to have an opinion about what I do? And like, shouldn't this person be able to decide for themselves this ethical decision? Because I mean, whether there's a life or not, like, they are the one responsible for this baby. Like, this is my child, and I will decide whether I think they're worth living or if it's worth my own mental health or well-being. And like, maybe I can't even bring this child into the world well. I can't care for it, and I don't want the baby to go from one foster home to another. And this is just easy as it clears out the problem. And then it's just like, that was my decision. Who are you, a man, or you, a woman in the suburbs, to tell me, a woman of color maybe, or whatever, single mom, what to do, or raped, or whatever the extreme situation. Like, think of the most extreme. Who are you to say anything?
And I think, as much as I would love to present a logical argument and say something like, well, life is life, and even though I don't know the people who get murdered in the streets because of gang violence, I still care about those murders, and therefore I care about life in the womb and the murder of life in the womb. I think the honest, repentant answer to that is, we have done a bad job as the Christian church of listening to people, right? So the reason they say you have no opinion because you're a man, or you're white, or you're not like me, in whatever the case may be, is because we have conditioned people to believe that we won't listen to them, that we can't understand them, we're incapable of it.
Right.
Like, if you are regularly communicating to a person that I am not you, I'm not like you, but I care deeply about understanding you, at the end of it, they won't say you have nothing to say. They might say you won't totally understand, but you care. And that's different than you have nothing to say.
Yeah.
Right? And so as a Christian community, I think we need to repent of that and say, we've done a whole lot of fighting anti-abortion as an idea, which is a fine thing to do and a good thing to do, but it has also come at the expense of the necessary compassion to help these people who are struggling through the decision of what they're going to do with their bodies. So, and the body of another human being from our perspective. So if I was ever dealing with somebody who was considering an abortion, I would not come at them with, you shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
The first thing I would want to do is deeply listen. Just tell me about everything. Tell me about how you got pregnant. Why or why not did you make these decisions to this point? What's your family background like? What do you think about money? What do you think about your future? What are your plans for the next 5 years or 10 years with or without a baby? Help me understand who you are and where you come from, so that at the end of it, I can say, I don't think I'm overstepping when I say I understand you. And I think based on my understanding of you, I can say this.
Yeah.
Right? But more often than not, before you would even get to an ideological answer in that conversation, you would have the opportunity to say, here's an insufficiency that I can help.
Yeah.
Right? So you're talking to this person, you're saying, like, what's your deal? What's the problem? What these decisions, etc. And they're like, well, I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough support, or I don't have a daddy in the picture, or I don't have whatever. And that's a point where a Christian can say, oh, I can help you with that. Yeah. Rather than say, let's fight for you to do or not do a certain action. Let's love you as a human being, so that at least at the end of it, they can't say, well, you don't have anything to say to this situation.
And I think, so I hear that, I'm like, yes, I want to do that, but like, again, I just don't know anyone who's in this situation. I've never met anyone, at least that I'm aware of, who's in this situation. And so I suppose, like, what I can do right now is just pray to God, like, the women who are considering this, like, Lord, bring them across my path, or, or maybe just help me to be a person where if someone in my social circles does know of someone in a situation, let them connect them with me or something, like, just bring these people into my life somehow, and our lives, like the Christian community, so that we can help them and pray for them and converse with them, because, like, I love the beauty of just tell me more about it, let me understand you, and it's really a great way to think, and then we can help them, because there oftentimes are things we can do to help. That's good. It's
part of the reason to publish these conversations between you and me also, is that, maybe you and I are not going to run into somebody who's considering abortion anytime soon, but somebody who's listening might, right? Or somebody who's listening's children might someday. And because we talked about it and they taught their children, then there's a life that's saved at some point later, or a life that is loved that would not also otherwise be loved. So words have power, ideas have power, even if they aren't particularly spoken directly to a person who needs to hear that idea at this point. So and this is a thing for all of us to think about, like, especially as Christians. I think sometimes we just think, well, that's a given in our culture. People understand that. No, like, we need to talk about those things, even for people who know already. It's worth hearing again, because you either get it reinforced, or you hear it a different way, or you're in a different stage of life and it hits your ears differently. I mean, I think of this when I do Bible studies. Like, sometimes I do Bible studies with people who are already members of our church, and I think, well, you know a bunch of these things. And I'm tempted to, like, skip parts of the Bible study. But I have to force myself to say, no, you're a Christian. You like hearing this, even if it's something you already know. So for the sake of the people listening, it's good for us to talk about these things.
Yeah. And just going beyond the slogans, I think that's what was kind of irritating me as I was, just checking out social media. And there's a slogan, and then it's batted down by another slogan on the other side. And then, just quick facts rather than, or one really radical story or something. What about this radical situation? And it's just all of this quick talk rather than full conversations around it. And it's not personal.
It's religion, right? I mean, this is my refrain. If you know me well, this is something I say all the time, but it's religion. And what does religion have? Well, religion has magic incantations. And the magic incantations are the little slogans we say to make somebody change or to make us feel better about ourselves. It's our mantra, is what one religion would call it, right? It's the thing that we say. We repeat, because it makes reality for us.
Like a liturgy.
Yeah. So it's all religion. It's all unprovable assumptions about the reality of the world that we are just trying to convince ourselves in order to make ourselves feel better. The difference with Christianity is Christianity does not need you to prove it to itself. It is historically true, right? And it has always been historically true, never been proven false. And therefore we can latch onto that, and rather than trying to make it real for ourselves, we can just realize the reality of what's already been happening. But I think we just need to be honest about that, because so often we think that these things are just about science, or they're just about logic, or they're just about politics. They're not. They're religion. And therefore, they are the work of Satan, right? Satan wants everyone to believe the not God religion, which is anything besides Christianity. And that brings with it a whole set of practical ways of dealing with human beings, right? When I deal with somebody who's not a believer and I want to convince them of Christianity, there's a certain place for logical argument, but I mean, the scripture makes it clear there's also space for the Holy Spirit, first and foremost, to make things different that I can't do. There's love that's involved, right? There's a recognition of humanity that's in there. So we just have to have that space when we're talking to people. This isn't as simple as, let me present you a study that shows you this is the obvious thing.
Right. Or listen to this podcast, you'll have the answer.
Right, because it's religion. And religious views are changed slowly over time.
And through God's people. And the word, obviously. So there's other arguments, and I don't think we've got the time to get to them. Like one that comes to mind is like keeping it legal keeps it safe, or something like that. And there's a lot to be said on all of these arguments. There's way more that we could talk about, but I think I'm just going to cut it off here. I mean, if someone has questions, like, we can answer them in a video, and that'd be fine. There is a lot more to talk to, but how I want to wrap it up is, what is our to do now? Like, we kind of know what's important. Like, what do we do with this? I mean, is it just go out and make friends with the poor people? I don't know. What would you say?
Yeah, there's a short-term solution and a long-term solution. So the short-term solution is to see the opportunities that God has placed in front of you. And if you cannot see the opportunities, start asking, right? Because the people in your community, and I mean that not only in a geographic sense, but I mean, like, the people you go to church with, the people you work with, the people that are your close friends, start asking them, what are the places where you do this? And if they don't have a place where they are doing this, well, then maybe it's time for you all to get together and start thinking about that. But don't think that you have to go out and do something drastic. Like, God has put things in front of you that are the little things that you can do. So maybe that is pregnancy crisis center. Maybe that is fostering. Maybe that is adoption. Maybe that is befriending the single mom who lives across the street from you. Maybe that is, something more drastic or less drastic, or whatever the case may be. The long-term solution is, of course, pray, which should go without saying, but it needs to be said. We need to pray about these things. But building a culture within each of our families that values life, and doesn't just value life as an anti-abortion stance, but values life that says every human being is valuable and worth my time. Because what I think people on the pro-life side of this still struggle with, even though they would say life should not be ended in the womb, is very often still a hedonistic, materialistic, entertainment-saturated culture that they are still part of, which is the force behind the person who says, I want to end this life in the womb. I want to be happy. I want to be comfortable. I want to be successful. Well, isn't that kind of what some of us on the right still think?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying right politically. I'm saying right is on this issue of being pro-life is generally more of a right position. Like, we still kind of want to be comfortable. We still kind of want to be happy. We still kind of want to be successful. And so if we can break ourselves and our culture, our family culture of that, I don't always need to be happy. I don't always need to be comfortable. I don't always need to be successful.
Right. And that's the hope of heaven that we have, is that, like, this is just a world of sorrow, and we're not going to get out of it. We're not going to, like, eventually make things right. We should strive to love each other and help each other, but it's not going to be right.
Well, yeah. So the curse is just that everybody is going to suffer. What we're trying to do is to balance that suffering. There's the reason the Bible says bear with one another, bear each other's burdens. Like, let's say if like 100% of each of us, or each at 100, that would be like absolute perfect happiness all the time. But there is allotted to all of humanity 50 points of suffering. So we're like 50% happy, 50% not happy. That's for the sake of argument. This isn't theological. This is just a thought exercise. I have the choice of taking some of your 50% of happiness and adding it to my 50% of happiness in order to make myself a little bit happier, but you're going to have to suffer more as a result. Christianity is uniquely saying we're all suffering. Let's all do our best to balance that suffering, rather than just throw all the suffering on one person or one subgroup of people, which is the abortion idea. Like, let's let the suffering happen to the unborn so that we can have a little bit more happiness ourselves. But we all kind of have to build that into just our regular everyday life. Parents have to say, I'm not going to be as happy as I want to be because I have children. Brothers and sisters in the house are going to have to realize, because of discipline, that I can't be as happy as I want to be because I have brothers and sisters in my house, and so on and so forth. We have to build that culture far before we're ever talking about abortion.
Yeah, I agree. I just finally wanted to just say that there are millions of babies that have been killed by abortion. I mean, it is sad, and it makes, I mean, I've heard the phrase, like, it makes the Holocaust look like a blip on the radar, and we can't, if you're pro-life, pro-life is not just something, I just feel for myself. Like, it is something that, like, we need to help other people. We need to care for other people. We need to educate other people, because abortion is not happening in my house. It's happening out there. And just like if during the Holocaust you'd want to help your brothers and sisters over there, well, those brothers and sisters, they have no voice. They're still in the womb. And so we have to care. We have to care as Christians. If just the thousands being slaughtered every day, it is so sad, and we can help them over time. Long-term answer and short-term prayers, like, all of that really matters. And also, again, if people have questions, please write them in. And then I just wanted to share 2 resources as well, if you can add it to the
description, show notes,
whatever. Christian Life Resources is really good. I think they come at it with compassion and facts and everything. And then also resources if someone's struggling with this. And then the other thing is Seth Gruber. He's got a podcast called Unaborted. And if you are looking for the really compassionate, loving conversation, it might not be as much there. He's more hard-hitting facts. He does have compassion depending on his audience, because he speaks for different things. But sometimes he's just like, here are the facts, and here's what it looks like, and here's what you say. But he's got a lot of good information and different arguments and apologetics, I think, in the pro-life side of things. So both of those resources, I think, are pretty solid. Anything
Great.
else?
No, thank you for sharing. And this is such a personal conversation. So if you do have a comment, leave it. We'd be glad to respond to it. Thanks for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.